Hey, this is Ryan.
Hey, Ryan, how's everything going?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Me too.
For some odd reason, when you sent me those pictures, like I'd been taking notes literally since we decided to, have this conversation. So I literally just went on this deep dive. And then when I got the images that you sent me, it literally just threw like the huge monkey wrench. I was like, oh my God, this is a whole bunch of stuff I
Oh,
did.
no,
Not in a,
no,
and I
no,
don't mean
no.
that
I'm
in a
sorry.
bad way. I mean that in a great way.
Okay.
The question that came to mind was, after seeing all that, do you consider yourself prolific?
Well, there's a lot in me, and I'm always just trying to get it out as efficiently as possible. And so when you ask the question is, am I prolific? That needs to be considered in a context. So Look at Picasso, look at Warhol. I don't think my output approaches theirs. So no, I'm not.
But you're also a lot younger. Like you still have a long way to go.
I don't know. I'm
Lord willing.
approaching. I'm approaching 50.
I do want to say congratulations on Mindscapes.
Oh, thanks.
I walked in and I was just immersed in the experience.
Thanks for saying that. That's definitely that was the idea. To create an immersive environment and to expand the paintings. The paintings couldn't be really contained in singular picture planes. And so that's good to hear. Great. Thank you.
Was there a point when you had the idea where you said, all right, I would like to create this painting of paintings, so to speak?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the opportunity came to me to do a project with Miles McGinness Gallery. And that's exactly how I received the invitation, as an opportunity to do a project, not necessarily an exhibition or a proper or formal exhibition. I wanted to make more of a statement and do something specific to the gallery. So that was the starting point. And then, the gallery has a few spaces on 22nd Street, and then they got a new third space, and then, of course, the space on 21st Street. And so all of the spaces were on offer to me, and I wanted that 21st Street space because it offered the opportunity to create a singular statement. Like you could take in whatever was going to be installed in that space all at once. So I wanted to make one grand statement.
From the outside, before you even walk in from the street, you can see the grand statement in its entirety.
That was the idea.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and that's why I chose that space. And then from there, I started sketching out just a whole brainstorm of different concepts. At one point, it was going to be all of my, what I call the studio views, which are the paintings within the paintings with the studio floor rendered in a kind of an iconic wood grain. And that was going to create a horizon line that was going to wrap around. So you'd be walking into the studio, so to speak. And then there would be paintings within. That was one idea. Another idea was to kind of collage together paintings of all different sizes and have it be more of a jumble. Another idea was to saturate the space with street signs. That's another body of my work, using the same materials that the Department of Transportation uses to make their signs, to just hang street signs all over the place. That was another idea. And then I, just kind of settled on, and I brought the gallery in to weigh in on all the different ideas. And we kind of settled on this idea of kind of one grand painting that is from what I call the Mindscapes series. And then, it just kind of evolved so that at first it was all just going to be super saturated picture planes, right? And then as I was sketching it out, then I found more spaces and moments to pause, and more composition started to evolve within the paintings. And then other bodies of work crept in. So there's what I would call the black holes, which are the flourishes that kind of fold in on themselves. And then some figures kind of folded in. And then there are some more narrative elements in there. It evolved. It started with, a basic concept, which was to do something site-specific and have one statement. And then it just got refined over a period of a few months.
What was one of the biggest challenges where you take 72 canvases, 9 different sizes, 6 feet tall, 127 feet long? What were some of the challenges to just incorporate your idea into those constraints, or were those they weren't constraints, they were just formatted as you went?
Well, I guess a kind of a system started to emerge as I laid out all the different sizes. And all the different sizes started to settle into, just like you said, I think there are 9 different sizes. Mm-hmm. I tend to take a very systematic approach to making my work. So whenever I can see a system emerging, I'll embrace it and run with that. So the formats started to kind of emerge, and the quantity started to kind of bubble up. And I tend to get hung up on numbers, and I need a real good reason for there to be a number attributed to something. So why 72? It may have fallen initially like around maybe, I don't know, maybe it was 75, maybe it was under 72. And I thought, well, I should just snap it into a number with meaning. So all my work, and this work in particular, is somewhat autobiographical. So I decided to make it 72, representing my year of birth. The height is my height. So I'm 6 feet tall and born in 72, and that's where those numbers come from.
And then the 127 feet come from the site specific?
Comes from the space.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this was important for me too, while it is site specific to that space, it can also be easily reconfigured to any other space. Okay. Because the breaks in that linear picture plane that's made up of smaller, panels, all the breaks are vertical. And there are other vertical is where that long rectangle breaks as well. So it could be on 2 walls, it could be on 1 wall, it could be on several, walls, and have it snake around any other space.
Can we talk about the macro and the micro scale to it? Because as I walked around, I did a few laps. I felt like just doing one lap wasn't going to do it justice. Like the first lap, I did real casual, just kind of like walked around, took it all in. Then the second lap, I went in, like I kind of got a little closer than I should. There was no line on the ground, so I and of course I didn't touch anything, but I'm in there, I'm looking, so I'm seeing the various statements. One of my favorites, of course, is the French kiss, and then there's like just a number of pieces in there that I took pictures of that even when the good people at the gallery gave me a book, I couldn't even find the pieces because I took pictures of them on my phone. I couldn't even find them in the book. I felt like if I went there 2 or 3 times, I would see something new.
Well, thank you for taking the time. And you're right, there are a lot of details to discern in those paintings. And you're absolutely right. There are kind of micro compositions and then macro compositions. But that's not to say that they relate. In fact, there's no overarching narrative, and there's no linear way to read the work. And this is reflective of how our minds work. Our minds are basically RAM, random access memory, to borrow a computer term. That's reflective of our daily subconscious thinking, our dream state. And there are a lot of discrete units of meaning within those paintings, and there are a lot of words, but there are no complete sentences.
So no stories.
No stories, except on a micro level within each symbol. There are a whole range of, again, what I call kind of units of meaning. Or each of those symbols I'll sometimes liken to different elements. They're the base units. And then when you combine the elements together, you'll get different compositions, much like in chemistry.
And I felt like your work, it's asking you to interpret it. But if I was with someone, what they think it is and what I think it is, it's probably going to be 2 different things. It's almost like interpreting a dream.
That's right, and I think that's kind of the beauty and the poetry of art. Mm-hmm. It allows you to bring something to the work. It doesn't dictate, as opposed to and I come from a design background, and that's what I studied. And so what I learned from my design background is that the burden of communication is really on the communicator. If I create something and it doesn't communicate to you, whatever that message might be, then I've failed. I think a lot of times in art, that burden is on the viewer or the receiver. And so that's where I think a lot of people feel that art has failed them or betrayed them because they might feel that they just don't get it,
I've been in situations where, say like if you walk through an art show, you walk through Basel, you walk through Scope or anything like that. And, I've gone with friends and it kind of just like the eyes just gloss over. And I'm like, you don't have to get everything, like just
right.
gravitate to things that move you and then kind of go from there. And it's more of an experience than anything.
That's right. That might be the difference between art that invites you, and then art that's maybe not so friendly,
Oh, absolutely. Especially nowadays as you walk the streets and I grew up in Queens, but I spent a lot of time in the Lower East Side over the last few years. There's been this merge where sometimes I'm looking at art, whether it's sculpture or whether it's street art or graffiti or what have you. But then sometimes I can't even tell what's an ad and what is art because they've commissioned certain artists to do, their logo in a way where it's hidden. There's a lot of overlap that's happening today.
Right. I see that as well.
Can you speak on pure geometry in your work?
Sure. Well, when I am developing my drawings, they all start with, ink on paper and sketches, and I will often use, vellum or tracing paper to make multiple kind of iterative sketches, all in an effort to move the drawing or the solution along. I'm searching for what the drawing really wants to be and trying to find the underlying geometry. I find a lot of truth in geometry. And so if I see something wants to be a perfect arc, then I'll make it an arc or a curve, or lines that want to be parallel will be exactly parallel. Right angles are true right angles, etc. And then when I get to a stage in the drawing or sketching process where I feel like that underlying geometry is starting to emerge, or that underlying system, then I'll bring it into the computer and make a more technical drawing where I can kind of shore up a lot of those, for instance, arcs and parallel lines again, and make sure that right angles really are right angles. And then that's when I'll turn the drawing into a vector file, which is really just an equation. It's really just information.
Oh, yeah, it's mathematics. I do a lot of stuff in Illustrator, and sometimes I have to explain to people the difference between raster and vector, and of course, RGB and CMYK.
Of course.
Which is kind of a good segue, because I want people to know that they should, of course, know about your work. And it's cool to like look at it in a book or look at it in a video. But when you see it in person, a lot of what you've done in the several layers that you've done on your canvases do not show up or register the way they do in person.
They don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And
does that bother you?
Well, it doesn't bother me. In fact, I use a lot of pigments which can only be fully appreciated in person.
Okay.
And so I'm talking about pigments with properties that cannot be reproduced, like fluorescence. Fluorescent paint is a, real world phenomenon. Metallic paints are a real world phenomenon. Iridescent, pearlescent, varnishes that reflect light, and even metal leafing is a material that can only fully be appreciated, again, in person. It's difficult to reproduce them either on the screen in RGB, as you mentioned, or in print with CMYK. Sometimes some catalogs I've done for exhibitions will include a couple extra colors. So there's hexachrome printing, CMYK, plus an orange, plus a green to pump up the colors a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're talking about simulation. What you're getting at with the question is does it bother me that there's a difference between, real world and simulation? Well, no, it doesn't bother me. That's just how it is.
What I love most about these particular paintings is the background. In some paintings, you can see, say, like, brush strokes. I couldn't see any brush strokes, of course, because of the screen printing. But in the background, I guess in the pearlescence, there was these like kind of like swirls that were very inviting. If you weren't really paying attention, you just wouldn't see them. But they were art in themselves, the way they were presented.
There's a variety of techniques in these paintings in particular, not just silk screening, but you're right. There's a lot of brushwork in those backgrounds with pearlescent paints. which purposefully, catch the light at, different angles. So there's a lot of cross hatching. And I, so when I say there's brushwork, it's a very particular kind of cross hatching that's very even and is designed to catch the light at all different angles.
In 1984, you wrote a paper titled "Communication Through Art."
Oh, right. Yes, that was in elementary school.
I can hear the pause. You're like, where are you going with this?
No. I was like, 84. Where was I? But yeah, I was 12 years old, and you're right. I wrote this paper called "Communication in Art." And, on occasion, I'll give lectures. So I've started on occasion. I have started my lecture by reading that paper without telling anybody what I was doing, and then I can, I slowly see the audience look at each other, and maybe people get up and leave because it's written, as a in a child's voice, right?
Wow.
And I think I talk about Michael Jackson and Pepsi and Star Wars in that paper, and then there's a reveal at the end that I was just reading from my 12-year-old self. But yes, that's a paper I wrote.
My question is, was that title a hypothesis or maybe a thesis? I may be using the wrong word, to essentially launch your journey to where you are now, to Mindscapes. As you look at the paintings, they are communicating, and it is art. So, I mean, is there anything there?
Well, I think there is there. You could definitely make the argument that there's a through line that started at about that time, again, in elementary school, where I became very curious about, art and what I would later come to learn as design and graphic design and the difference between the two. And I, went to a school for gifted and talented kids for art when I was young. And so from a very young age, I took the pursuit of art very seriously, as opposed to most kids' experience with art, where it's maybe an elective or an easy grade or a goof-off class or something like that.
Right.
From a very early age, it was a very serious pursuit for me, and a heavy one, like a really heavy pursuit. And then, I gravitated more toward making graphics and painting skateboards and decorating T-shirts and making stickers and making zines and things like that. And then in high school at some point, I learned that all of those activities were called the graphic arts. And that's really what I wanted to study. I loved, working with lettering machines and on photocopiers and typesetting and silk screening. And so that's what I went off and studied, which again, as I mentioned earlier, the basic premise is and the goal is to communicate, visually.
There was an interview that you did back in 2001 with Takashi Murakami. He interviewed you, and you were talking about, I don't know if your answer has changed, the difference between art and graphic design.
Yeah, I went on his, he invited me to be on his radio show when I was in Tokyo. Thanks for listening to that. That is
that was a great interview.
Reflective of a deep dive. I think that's buried on the website somewhere.
It is, but
so thank you for finding that. Yeah,
and I mean, people should know. I mean, the information is still relevant. You were saying something to the extent of art is commodities based. It's a commodities based industry, like things and installations and even performance. But it's about communicating your ideas, as opposed to graphic design being a service. But I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, as far as industry goes, I mean, this is aesthetics aside and concepts aside.
Okay.
Just the basic industry. The difference in the industries is that, design really is a service industry. And I was never really good at providing a service. What I loved was drawing. I wasn't very good at, the salesmanship of it, or assuming a client's problems as my own. I've got plenty of my own problems,
Yeah, I understand that.
So I was never very good at the industry side of all of that. I just loved drawing.
Can you talk about using beauty as a Trojan horse?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's funny. I had an experience rather recently where an art consultant brought her collector over to look at a painting in particular and wanted to know some of the particulars of the symbols and have me kind of decode or explain some of the imagery, because upon first glance, the painting is beautiful. And I try to make beautiful and aesthetically pleasing things. But when you take a closer look and start to decode individual drawings and the individual units of meaning, some of them are dark and disturbing. There's a lot of suicide in there. There's a lot of there's some skull fucking. There are a lot of orgies and sexual references.
Even that French kiss where the one tongue is going into the other one all the way to their stomach.
That's right.
Like, that would blow me away if I gave someone a kiss and their tongue went in my stomach. I'd be horrified.
That's right.
But it looks aesthetically pleasing. Like, it looks really cool. But if you look at it again, you're like, wait a minute. Would I ever want that to happen to me? That doesn't even remotely look fun.
I think that drawing's a great example of a symbol that, because it's rendered in, like a lot of my drawings, it's rendered in a very kind of universal icon aesthetic, so it speaks with a certain kind of authority. In fact, it might even look like it's been sourced from somewhere else or appropriated. But in fact, it's an original drawing. And because it speaks with that kind of visual language, you might just kind of, like you said, gloss over it. But then when you actually start to decode it, like, well, wait a second. And so it requires for you to do almost a double take to get past the aesthetics to decode the meaning.
One of my favorites is rainbow, fuck you.
Yeah. The two middle fingers that form a rainbow.
And you may see the rainbow first and just kind of gloss over the middle fingers. And then again, at second glance, you're like, wait a minute. Wait, where's this going?
Right. So this comes back to your original question, which has to do with using beauty as a Trojan horse. The aesthetics get you in, and then, once you're kind of behind the enemy walls, then the meaning comes out of that, comes out of that gift and attacks you.
Exactly. If you and it catches you, like, it just sidelines you.
Right.
Have you ever just taken a glance at, say, like hobo signs and symbols and codes like that?
Oh, of course.
Man.
Henry Dreyfuss published a famous volume on signs and symbols that included a lot of those hobo signs and symbols.
There was a great documentary called Who is Bozo Texino? It's a great documentary about that as well. It's a black and white. Like, it's kind of hard to find, but if you Google it, it'll pop up.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off when you were talking about Henry in the book.
No. Sorry, just that there's a great book that decodes a lot of those hobo signs, along with some kind of more mainstream signs and symbols from like the Department of Transportation and, some of the sign symbols that have been developed for the Olympics, over the years. Henry Dreyfuss kind of collected all of those into a great book called, I think it's just straight up Signs and Symbols.
You sold your first painting to a teacher for $60?
Yeah, I think that must have been like 6th grade.
What did that do for you? Were you going to be an artist regardless, or was this kind of like, okay, I'm on the right track?
Oh, yeah, no. It was no confirmation, attributing, a dollar value to my work. But the fact that the work was valued, I think, was, had some kind of a profound effect on me. But the second part of your question, like being an artist regardless, I think that's definitely the case, because I don't think people decide to be artists. It's more of an accommodation, rather than a decision.
I mean, I work in the creative industry, and people kind of look at my decision making. I've had conversations where they're like, I couldn't live like how you live. I need to know where my income's coming in. And I'm like, well, I don't like small talk by coffee machines, so it's like, touche.
That's the trade-off, right?
I can't help it. Like, I would love to go, I guess, corporate, and I mean, maybe that's still in the cards, but like right now, the freedom to be able to just define my day and design my day, it was been pretty addictive since I began. It was scary as hell to take the leap. But then when I got that first taste of it, and I was just like, I want more of this. So I fight for my time.
Well, I think that's what it comes down to. When you work for yourself, you fight for your time, and it takes a great deal of discipline and sacrifice. It means, in the very simplest of terms, making decisions about what you value in life. You have to reject, a lot of things that other people might value, whether it be just recreational or family or doing anything else besides your work, and I think sometimes that can be seen as being selfish, but, you have to take that as well.
How much time do you spend in the studio?
I'm in the studio right now. and I guess the sillier way of answering that is that, there's a studio of the mind that you never escape. So you're always in the studio.
Have you tallied how vast your symbol system is? Do you know how many pieces you have, or it's kind of hard to keep count because do the iterations count, or do you have a general idea of how many units are in your universe?
I love that question because I've asked myself that same question over the years. And last year, I finally finished a 5-year project of cataloging all of the different elements and putting them into periodic tables by category and by subject matter, and also accounting for, you say, variations, which is true, but I would call them, in keeping with the chemistry, analogy, they would be like isotopes,
Okay.
So maybe they vary by 1 or 2 electrons. So anyway, the point is that I do know, I can't tell you off the top of my head because they are kind of parsed out into different categories, but I have one massive 3-ring binder on my desk with, printouts of little micro thumbnails of all of my drawings.
You create everything from scratch. You would rather be appropriated as opposed to being the artist that appropriates.
Right. And that's that preference is a reflection of what I value. And so it's not an attack on, people who appropriate or can't draw or make their own images and have to, rearrange and take from, their surroundings and that approach, but rather it, like I said, it's just a reflection of who I am and what I value.
Understood. I don't even know the right word. When you approach the Marcel Duchamp bicycle wheel, what would you call that?
Yes. So I am then doing my version of the world around me. So I'm making a drawing of that.
Okay.
That is unique unto me, as opposed to taking someone's photo of that and then reusing that. That's the difference. But that's a great question.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm just genuinely curious about that because, there's a photo of a naked woman and then the process of how you get to the symbol. And am I calling it a symbol or an icon or a unit when you get to that final part that makes its way into the painting?
You're calling it whatever you want.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't want to be offensive.
But no, oh my gosh. Oh, please. It's not funny.
I'm telling you, sometimes you talk to artists and they're like, whoa, why would you call that an icon? And then they're like, this interview is over. That doesn't happen like that, but I don't ever want it to happen.
But you know what, as an aside, I think what you're getting at is that most of our offenses are language based. Mm-hmm. And because I think all of us kind of want the same thing at the end of the day. Sometimes our vocabulary doesn't overlap. And when it doesn't, that's when people might be offended, talking about all areas of life,
Understood.
So
Understood.
I think that's where a lot of conflict comes from, differences in language, really. But to answer your question, that's an aside. So in a lot of cases, when I'm drawing from life, sometimes I will take snapshots and take photos and then draw from those photos later. That's especially the case when I'm drawing my little girls, especially with the mother and child series when they pose with my wife, because those girls are super squirmy and they can't hold still. So I'll just take a series of snapshots, use that as the starting point.
Exploiting the analog glitches.
Right. And so that's a phrase I've used to describe my approach to, silk screening in particular. Mm-hmm. When people work with me in the studio, the first thing I tell them is I don't silk screen the right way or the proper way, which is to say I'm not concerning myself with making multiple reproductions that all match. And I don't use hinges and I don't use registration marks. And it's very loose and very free form. And there are a lot of what most people would consider like mistakes. Because I'm using water-based acrylic while I'm bouncing from painting to painting with the screens and with the paint and squeegee. And there is one of these, so-called mistakes. I have like a 3 to 5 minute window of opportunity to decide if I'm going to keep it or, wipe it up and clean it up. And I'll often keep those glitches as a way to express the humanity that goes into the work, to signal that that's a mistake. I made that mistake, or I didn't intend that, or that's a happy accident. But even the decision to include it is a considered one. Like I said, there is a little opportunity there, like a 3 to 5 minute opportunity to actually wipe it up and clean it up and to say, actually, that's not a good mistake.
All because I can see you have a ton of organization and pre-sketching and organization. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into before you seem to even begin to grab paint. Is there a part where once the painting is finished, you're seeing it for the first time? You have an initial idea and then when it's done, something different, or it's exactly what you created conceptually? Does it change throughout the process?
The process informs the finished painting. And so I will often start with some foggy notion of a composition that sometimes I'll sketch out with a thumbnail and use scribbles to represent a mass of images. But the paintings always go off on their own. They grow and they do their own thing, even to the point where it's out of my control. And sometimes that's good. Mm-hmm. And when I don't agree with it, I will. Yesterday, for example, I spent a good part of the day sanding down a painting that just wasn't working. So on occasion, do have to either paint over or sand down paintings because they've gotten out of control, and I just don't like them.
Can you talk about the importance of the Cologne Progressives?
Oh, sure. So this is a group of artists, let's see, end of 1920s into the 30s, primarily Eastern European. Gerhard Arntz was one I really like, Augustin Schinkel.
Franz Seward.
Yes, primarily concerned with simplifying the world around them into, again, kind of symbols or icons. And this aesthetic development and pursuit was so successful at communicating that it kind of spun off from the formal canon of art history and was kind of co-opted by the state and industry, where the images had a utility attached to them. They could be used for infographics and used to, again, kind of communicate. But my interest in these artists and their work is solely aesthetic.
Got you. Especially kind of getting back into Mindscapes, where they were talking about early European artists wanting to come off the architecture and be dependent, not as dependent as they have been to the architecture, and kind of move on to canvases that were portable. When you look at the gallery that Mindscapes was in, it was site specific. So you specifically made the pieces to fit that, which kind of was a nod to early European artists.
Right. And you're referring to the essay in the Mindscapes book, written by Joy Finkel, who's a great writer and critic of art. And this is the value of bringing in, a professional to write about the work. She saw that connection, and it's an absolutely valid and substantiated assertion that she made, but it's not necessarily one that I really knew about, and it wasn't, part of my intention.
That was part of my question. If that was your intention.
Not necessarily. I absolutely agree with her. And again, this is the value of bringing in a professional to provide this kind of insight. But and she also pointed out something and she really picked up something that maybe I had subconsciously been trying to assert with this installation, is that I could kind of do something site specific all at once almost unbearable and unmanageable in that it's one huge painting, but at the same time it could be broken up and easily marketed with singular units and even some smaller groupings. And so it was a way, I think she actually said that I could have my cake and eat it too, which is absolutely accurate, you know.
I do want to say that you can read that article, and I'll put a link on the website. It's on issue.com, and the whole entire book is there. Like, I found the book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Or a simulation of the book.
A simulation of the book, absolutely. But it's
right.
all the pages are there for free.
Yeah, and that's to the credit of the gallery. I mean, they are taking great efforts and expense to, you know, contribute to the scholarship of the work of their artists, and so they make that book available, you know, in simulation. You know, online. And I guess that was your question. Like, why?
Yeah, my question is, why are you, I mean, aside from that, like, there's literally hours upon hours of images and process and interviews. Why have you been so vulnerable about your, transparent? Why have
I know you mean, yeah.
So transparent about your process? And I mean, it's clear. It's like, this is how I did it. This is it. Why have you been?
Right.
Some people, like, they hide that. They're like, no one needs to know. It's proprietary. No one needs to know my process. But you are like, come on in, take a look.
Right. I think that fear of sharing is, well, let's just say I have no fear of sharing.
Okay, gotcha.
And furthermore, I think when you share your process and you share how you came to a solution, you know, it validates the work and it makes your solution irrefutable. This is the same strategy, you know, I learned and we all learned when we, you know, solved calculus problems or algebra or geometry problems. You show all your work to show how you got to your solution.
Yep.
So your solution is irrefutable.
Throughout this journey as an artist or just your personal journey, what has been the most important lesson that you've learned so far?
Oof, that's a big question. It's a lesson I'm still learning and I need to remind myself of more and more. And that's, you know, it sounds cliche. Everyone says the same thing, but listen to yourself, listen to your instincts, honor your intuition, because your intuition is informed by your whole life and all of your experiences. And so your intuition is your soul and yourself and has the answers. I'm constantly reminding myself of that because I'm someone who, on a superficial level, needs a lot of evidence in order to make decisions. And I'm driven by logic. And sometimes it's not enough for me to say, I got a funny feeling about this, you know, when there's no other evidence to substantiate a feeling. And so it's difficult for me to stay in tune with my intuition.
That's beautiful. We'll wrap it here like that. Do you have any final words or anything you want to say or shout out anybody?
I just want to thank you for actually preparing and doing a deep dive and doing research. And that is why I wanted to take the time to send you those images, take the time to, as much time as you want, to speak with you and answer all your questions as thoughtfully as I can, because I wanted to match your effort. And I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I really care. I look at this project as an evergreen thing that I felt like years from now, people can have this audio portrait of this conversation and say, well, that was Ryan and Ryan's words. Like, we don't have to interpret it or we don't have to make up something that he felt like, you know, you can read it, but your voice is powerful. I feel like people's voices are powerful. And just on a personal level, when I've interviewed, say, like my grandmother and various people in my family, when 10 years goes by, you listen to it and you damn near want to cry because you're like, so much has changed since that conversation.
But listen, don't discount the role you play because you're guiding it, and it's as much a portrait of you as it is of me.
Wow.
Nobody can be an objective, reporter. And there's no such thing as an objective documentary, for instance, or an objective document. You're the writer of this, and so there's just as much of you in here as me.
I will tell you a secret, Ryan. My goal for every episode is for the guest, whoever interviews them next, they feel like, man, they're not interviewing me like Amon's interviewing me. I don't like this. I'm trying to ruin it for whoever's next. Like, step your weight up. I'm competitive like that. Like, let's get it. Like, if we're gonna do it, let's do it.
No. I love that approach, and I love that mindset, because I try to do the same thing with the paintings I make. I want to ruin it for everyone else.
Yeah, that's what we get. Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it, so we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Ryan. I sincerely appreciate this conversation, and we're out of here. Peace.
Thank you. Bye.